and Japanese and literature, and the Institute of Buddhist Studies with a master's degree in Buddhist Studies. He also did graduate work at Rikoko University with a master's and PhD degrees in Shin Buddhist Studies. He has an academic rank with Nishi Hongwanji of Hokyo. And we're so happy that you're joined us for your kind of first speaking, teaching engagement here in Hawaii. And as the bishop said, we hope to see you again often and join the illustrious, cast of folks that have come like Mas Kodani and Tai Uno. And because I think they were real favorites here, and I think hopefully you'll be a favorite too. So take it away.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Please join me, Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Well, good evening, everybody. Before I begin with this final day, I'd like to thank the BSC Buddhist Study Center Planning Committee and all the individuals who are involved in this, the bishop, and for allowing me to come to Hawaii. I know I'm the pinch hitter, and when the Dexter sent me the email, invited me to come, I was thinking, oh no, I can't come to Hawaii, but there's no way. I mean, there's no way I'm going to pass up this offer, And so I made sure that I could fit it into my schedule, and I'm very happy to have come and be able to spend time with all of you in sharing the Dharma. So thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. So on this last day, I kind of wanted to recap each day what I've kind of talked about very briefly, and just kind of which is in relation to what this Jodo Shinshu identity is, because the title of this this week's theme, I guess you could say, would be Shinran Shonin's challenge. And so what is this challenge that Shinran Shonin provides for us? I mean, quite obviously, 800 years after Shinran Shonin, what's it to him for us to have? I mean, he didn't know that this is going to happen way down the line in history. But if we read his works, and if we read his or understand his teaching, he's challenging pretty much every generation, right, of the Nembutsu line. And how do we kind of resurface that challenge to the forefront and engage with that challenge? Okay, so I'd like to kind of think about what that means here in the 21st century. So if I could go to the, if I could go to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, so yeah, maybe we could go to the next slide. Okay, so the first day talked about the Kyogyo Mondri, otherwise known as the Kyogyo Shinsho, and passages on the Pure Land Way. The Kyogyo Shinsho, of course, being the magnum opus of Shinran Shonin, his main kind of work that talks about his understanding of the Nembutsu teaching. So I explained that there is a world of boundless wisdom and compassion, which we call Amida Buddha. It is the working of absolute truth. And this truth speaks to every sentient being, and everyone will come to this truth in their own spiritual journey. Each and every one of you will have your own story of how you encountered or will encounter this world of truth. Your life experiences, your various episodes in your life are unique to you, and only you can possibly understand what is being spoken to you. And you are the Buddha's only child. When we awaken to this boundless world of infinite wisdom and compassion, we begin our dialogue with truth, and the world of absolute truth is calling to us as the Onenbutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Okay, we could go to the next slide. In day 2, the Sanjo Wasan, on this day I talked about how encountering the world of absolute truth first shatters our secular or mundane worldview, where we will lose all trust in humankind's attempt to find truth. It is at this point that we arrive at the spiritual ground zero, if you will. And this is the one-time absolute negation of all worldly values. Shinran uses the term yo ito in this, regarding this. In other words, we come to see the limitation and emptiness of all worldly values, and we come to stop putting all of our stock in this endeavor. However, this spiritual ground zero should not be seen as something ominous of what is to come. Instead, this is the point that allows us to spring back forth in the mundane world. And the difference is that now our complete trust is not in worldly values, but rather in Amida Buddha's great wisdom and compassion. This is what now becomes the center of our lives moving forward, the motivation in which to live. And with this newfound understanding, we become soft and gentle in heart and mind toward oneself and others. We could go to the next slide. Okay, in day 3, notes on essentials of faith alone and notes on one's calling, many calling. I talked about how learning the Buddha Dharma is learning a new language. We are learning to speak the language of Namo Amida Butsu or Jodo Nis. And we converse with truth when we reflect on life. We are embraced in this world, but we have to kind of learn to listen. And just like the 3 sons who learned together about how their father truly loved them, but didn't express it in the way that they understood it at first, so too is the language of this voiceless voice, very hard to comprehend at first. And we must, is that in here? Okay. And then we must continue to open our hearts to this calling voice in order to see that the world of boundless wisdom and compassion is always embracing us. It is at the temple and its various activities that we learn to speak the language of the great wisdom and compassion together with the Sangha. And let's move on to the next slide. With Shinnan's letters in Tanisho, I took a little more look more deeply into Shinnan's understanding of the self as a person of blind passions. In contrast, Amida Buddha's great wisdom and compassion is our spiritual mirror that shows us our true hearts and minds. However, this is a very difficult teaching to receive because we are humbled to understand that we are beings of blind passions. But once we swallow this tough pill that is hard to swallow, this medicine will slowly start to take effect. And we will slowly begin to see the world in a much more different way from before. So based on the above points, the Jodo Shinshu identity can be further distilled in the following ways, I believe. So you could go to the next slide. 1, my unique spiritual path is the precise route I needed to take to arrive at absolute truth. 2, I should entrust myself not to the ephemeral mundane world, but rather the truth that transcends space and time, the principle of infinite wisdom and compassion, i.e., Amida Buddha. Number 3, I need to have a personal dialogue with the world of absolute truth, or the voiceless voice of Amida Buddha. And number 4, I am not truth. I will not attain truth, but I am certainly embraced within truth, the principle of boundless wisdom and compassion. So these points are certainly not an exhaustive list of what constitutes the Jodo Shinshu identity. They are some of the important aspects that we have covered throughout this week. And these are points we can remember when we go out into the world and engage with society at large. For example, using this first point, we need to keep in mind that everyone is going to be on their own spiritual paths. There's no telling of who is quote unquote ahead, right? Or who is quote unquote behind on one's spiritual journey. If we do try to say who is ahead and behind, what standard are we using in which to determine that? Is that not something that we have arbitrarily created to gauge someone's spiritual progress? Who gave us the authority to do that? In addition, when we see other people doing that to others, right, we can see that their way of life is misguided through their own egocentric worldviews. We know that we should be careful of their creed and way of life because it lends itself to arrogant ways. Thus, we have to be wary of putting on airs in terms of our spiritual selves. When we portray ourselves to be better than other people or superior to other people, that self-righteous attitude is contrary to our Jodo Shinshu values. So the other day I came across a very intriguing passage and it reads as follows. It's in Japanese, and I translated it in my own words, so I apologize if the translation is a little off, but maybe we can go to the next slide. 救いとは答えではなく、問いが見つかることである。答えは一生を決めつける。問いは一生を歩ましめる。Okay, so that translates to spiritual liberation is not to have answers, it is to have questions. If we come to an answer, we jump to conclusions about what life is supposed to be. if we come to the question, it makes us walk on the journey of life. I think this is a very kind of powerful and deep statement. This is this was written on this is like I guess Bukkoji temple, which is a Jodo Shinshu temple, but a different denomination. Has on their tenji, like they have this like huge signboard where they have like their quote of the day or the quote of the week. I think they change it weekly. But anyway, somebody compiled all of these quotes into a book, and so there's a book on this, and so I took it from there. Again, it's the Bukkoji temple. So this is a saying that spiritual liberation is not to come to the answer in life. It does not bring us to say that life is this or that we're supposed to live like this. We need to be like this. We need to think like this. If we do not do these things, then we're not living correctly, or we are not living piously as good people. We are not living justly or morally. And from a Shinshu standpoint, this is not what spiritual liberation is. Actually, as a matter of fact, many times when we do think we have the answer, we tend to impose this answer onto other people. We impose this onto ourselves. We set these high, these unattainable expectations of ourselves. We say that life is supposed to be like this, or I should be like this, you should be like this, society should be like this, right? And we make all these demands to ourselves and to others. And then when things don't go the way that we believe they should be going, we get angry, we get jealous, we hold grudges, we start taking it out on others, and we start to mock and disdain others, disparage others for what is really our misguided way of thinking. And so, I'm sure there are tons of examples that you can see of this playing out in our society. So I won't get into those, but I'm sure you can think of all these. As soon as you flip on the television, that's all you see, right? It's on the news, it's everywhere. And the other thing about this is that it's not about, liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, rich or poor. It's everyone. It's everyone that's doing this. And we have to kind of keep that in mind. And keeping that in mind, I believe, is part of this Buddhist identity. But the poem continues, and it says that there is another way of looking at life. If we come to spiritual liberation and we find that we come to the question and not the answer, what that means is we come to the meaning of life in the way that we live. Isn't that interesting? It is a completely different outlook on life. It's like all of a sudden, all this weight comes off of our shoulders. Now it's not about, I have to live like this. You have to live like this. Society has to live like this. That's the answer, right? Where we get stressed out and because the world doesn't operate the way that we feel that it should be working. Instead, now with this new mindset of going for the question or coming to the question, our mindset is different. Now it's about, what is life? Why does Amida Buddha's great compassion save us? What is Nembutsu? What is the Pure Land? Why am I a Bonbu? Why does this world suffer, right? And these questions prompt us to continually walk on the path of life. Every moment is no longer a burden, but rather a chance to encounter absolute truth. So as we continue questioning, walking the path of life, experiencing the different things we see in life, all these things become the ways in which we verify the truth of the Buddha Dharma, the truth of Amida Buddha's compassion. That's why this religion is so hard to retain members or attracting new members, I believe, because we don't have this kind of one-size-fits-all answer, and we can't, provide nice little sound bites, right, that everyone can use in their daily lives, or we can, but they're hard to find, right? Or it feels like they're few and far between. In a sense, in Jodo Shinshu, there's no real kind of elevator pitch, right, to this religion. Right now, BCA, a lot of the temples are really focused on this elevator pitch. If you're in an elevator and someone asks you about, well, what's Jodo Shinshu that you have from now till they get to whatever level they're at to explain what Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is in a couple words, right? So there's like this challenge going around of how can we make it concise to be able to give this message, right? And I truly do think it's a good task to do, and I think it's a good endeavor to think about what is our elevator pitch. But in a sense, what I'm trying to get at is that it's hard to explain, right, this in a very small or concise and straightforward way, right? In a sense, there's no instant gratification that we can offer people who just come to one of our Sunday services as kind of a one-off thing, right? This religion isn't about offering kind of few minutes of relaxation and meditation so that you can better focus on your daily jobs or lower your stress levels, right? That's not what this religion is about. And that is certainly not what Jodo Shinshu offers, right? Jodo Shinshu offers you the ability to question. It offers you the freedom to live an authentic life, not bogged down by what a religion's dogma tells you how to live. You choose, right, what your life is going to be. But at the same time, this religion lets you know that if you fall based on your choosings and your decision making, if you fall, it will be okay. Right? Life is not about trying to meet this bar that you have to constantly make it, that you're going to be okay. It's not about telling others how to live their lives. Rather, life is about coming to the awakening of your true, authentic self, and that you're going to be okay no matter how many times you might fall. Even if you don't give up, you are still in Amida Buddha's embrace. Think about the audacity for a religion to say something like that, right? To be able to say to its followers, you have to come to your meaning of this life, right? And all of this is made possible by Amida Buddha. There's another popular Buddhist reading, and it reads like this. If you could go to the next slide. 咲いた花を喜ぶ者は多いが、咲かせた根をねぎらう者は少ない. Which translates to, there are many who enjoy the flowers that bloom, but few will appreciate the roots that allowed the flowers to bloom. You are the sakura flower. You are the flower. You can live authentically. But hardly anyone gives credit to, hardly anyone appreciates or gives deep gratitude for the root that made that flower bloom in the first place. Why? Because they can't see it. It's underground. It's below the ground. And so, a lot of people only see what they believe or believe what they see, right? But it's there. If we look carefully enough, it's there. Amida Buddha is the root. Amida Buddha is the fundamental aspiration for the spiritual liberation of all beings. Amida Buddha enables you to live a truly authentic life. You are not required to meet a set of standards, or you're not required to meditate on hours on end. You're not required to sever your ties with your family members, or to live an ascetic lifestyle somewhere in the woods, right? Completely devoid of everyone and in complete solitude. Nevertheless, Amida Buddha is calling out to you, telling you that you are okay just as you are. So all we have to do is kind of question life, question the Nembutsu, question ourselves and the preconceived notions that we have about this life, question our journey and what the meaning of this life is. That's how we converse with this world of the voiceless voice. And I think that's how we live spiritually. This is how we can live in accordance to the Nembutsu teaching. It's not questioning just for the sake of questioning, right? It's not just questioning, out of resentment or anything like that, but questioning earnestly and honestly, right? All while you say the Nembutsu and continue to walk on the Nembutsu path. Only then will this religion reveal itself to you through your life experiences. So in a sense, there is no elevator pitch to this religion. There is no instant gratification in this religion. This is, however, a promising journey. This is what this religion offers. It offers you your own customized spiritual path, right? So returning back to the list that I came up with, if you can go back a couple slides, or wait, maybe it's on the next slide, sorry, pardon. Yes, on the second, so here on the second point, I talked about the first point, so if I can talk about the second point a little bit more concretely, we can see that although it's important for us to engage in social issues and think about what is the best way to move forward as a society, we have to remember that both sides to pretty much any argument believes that they're right. As such, we should not naively trust groups who do not have the Nembutsu teaching at the central focal point of their movement. In fact, both sides, many times, the argument do make legitimate claims and or grievances in their arguments. So rather than to say that one group is all good or that the other is all bad, or to condemn one party over the other, it is best that we approach the issue with as much calm and patience as possible and not be quick to judge who is in the right or who is in the wrong. We also have to keep in mind that we should be wary of siding with any political movements, liberal or conservative, Democratic or Republican. Right? Shinna Shonin strictly cautions us against siding with certain political parties or factions that are in power. This is in his letters. I didn't talk about this directly, but it's in there if we look at it. And the reason being is that these groups have their own motivations for power, control, and resources, and they're only using our spiritual message to benefit their own personal agendas for the time being. Once we are of no use to these people, they will quickly throw us away or even seek to disband and destroy us. This has happened time and time again in the history of Shinshu, but it can happen again. So of course, what I'm speaking about in terms of Jodo Shinshu is as a collective whole, how each person acts, whether individually is a different story, right? That's up to that person. That's that one person's individual, that's that person's business, right? But as a collective whole, as a collective Jodo Shinshu unit is what I'm kind of referring to here. Okay, so the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we go back to this? The third point I think I wanted to talk about. All right, I lost my place here. Let me move on to the fourth point. I think I lost my place. But on the fourth point, when we come to see the fallibility of this soul, the limitations of this soul, that we're not all that great that we make ourselves up to be, a whole new kind of world opens up. I know this teaching may seem very self-deprecating or pessimistic in times, but in fact, it's none of those. It's simply just being realistic. We are the ones who are unrealistic, and we are the ones who paint this really kind of rosy picture of who we think we are. Right? It's kind of like as I have a 7-year-old, and as a parent, I learn a lot of things about myself. And so as a parent, I tell my child, things like, you shouldn't cuss, right? You should not think bad thoughts. You shouldn't do bad things, right? You should be respectful and caring of others. You should listen to your elders and your teachers and show them respect, right? All the while, I know that I am lying to my child in a certain respect, right? Every day, I use terrible words, right? I think terrible thoughts of other people. I revile people I don't like, right? I have lustful thoughts of women around me all the time, right? I mean, especially here in Hawaii, right? Or sorry, was that a little bit too much information? But anyway, my point is that I paint this kind of picture of myself being this stoic, straight-laced individual, right? Who is infallible in reasoning skills, and my son is fed this lie, right? But this picture of myself is something very easy, even for me to believe in, that this, I am this stoic, straight-laced person. And then before long, I start to see myself as that ideal person, right? Even though I'm not. And without realizing, I bought into my own lie. And what Amida Buddha teaches me is to first see this ideal self as the lie, and then to see how easy it is to get caught up in this fake self. In a sense, Amida Buddha kind of recalibrates us, right? To kind of come off of that high horse, right? And to kind of recalibrate and come back to zero, right? Come back to zero. But the more often we listen to the Buddha's teachings, the more we begin to grow kind of suspicious of this kind of fake self that we fabricate, right? To be suspicious of that. Is that really who I am, right? So when I say to myself in my mind, as I'm disciplining my son, right? Who are you to be teaching this kid? You're more guilty of this thing than your son is of these infractions, right? That's actually kind of the right approach, I think, right? Because we recall that the Buddha Dharma teaches us about our true and honest feelings. But now with the Buddha Dharma, I can now see that true self about me. I'm recalibrating through Amida Buddha's working. So then when I finally come to understand through the Buddhist teachings that I'm capable of fabricating this fake self and believing in this lie, I now see that this is what everyone else around me is also doing, right? Ironically, instead of being disdainful and hateful of other people, I become what's called soft and gentle in heart and mind, as the larger sutra puts. I become more understanding and empathetic of others around me. I now see that they're just trying to do the best that they can with what they've been given. I am doing the best that I can with what I've been given. It's okay. And my attitude towards others and myself changes through this teaching. So going back to this list, then, someone might say, well, this list is still too abstract. It's not concrete enough. I mean, how am I supposed to use this to understand, what I'm supposed to think about, abortion, gun rights, and these kinds of things, right? Et cetera, et cetera. To which the answer to that is that, Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is not going to tell you how to stand on one issue, right? It's not going to tell you how to vote in the next election. And if you don't think that's a good enough answer, I'm sorry, I can't stretch it any further than that, right? I can't stretch this teaching to fit and accommodate your demands of what this religion is, right? The discipline of this teaching is to say that you have to decide what it is to be an ethical Jodo Shinshu Buddhist for yourself. You have to decide how you're going to stand on the issue of abortion. You have to decide how you're going to stand on the issue of gun control and et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and the future of our relationship with, things like AI, right? Artificial intelligence. Now, granted, a lot of, that decision-making is based on our karmic condition, like, where we live, our upbringing, right? Our socioeconomic status and these kinds of things. These all factor in, but in the end, this decision has to be yours of where you're going to land on these issues. So, sometimes, I think to myself, if this freedom is too much responsibility for someone, maybe Jodo Shinshu isn't the right teaching for this person, Many people want to believe or want to be told what to think and to do, right? It's just easier that way. We talked about this yesterday, right? If someone told me to do A, B, and C, and my salvation would be granted because I did those things, then that's much easier for me to follow than say, Shinjing is the true cause for birth in the Pure Land, right? So if you want to be told what to think and how to act, right? There's plenty of other religions that will do that, right? But Jodo Shinshu does not do that. And so, so because the here in this tradition, it is incumbent on us to make that decision for ourselves, right? And because, the truth of the matter is, no matter what way we decide to vote in the next election, no matter what way we stand on a certain social issue, political issue, we will still remain in this world of saha, that is suffering. So long as we think that the problem is out there. The problem is those people. The problem is someone else, right? Those people on the other side of the railroad tracks. Those group of people who are causing me great pain, right? Right. We will, as long as we do those things, like that we think it's someone else other than the self that is causing this suffering, we will never break free from this world of suffering. Buddhism is a teaching that begins and ends in introspection, with introspection. It starts and ends here. When we resolve the issue of the self, we resolve the issue of suffering, not just for ourselves, but that of all of humanity. So in one of Shinan's famous quotes in the Wasan, in the Hitan Jukkai-san, where he reflects on and laments on his nature, he writes the following. Can you go to the next slide? Although I take refuge in the true Pure Land way, it is hard to have a true and sincere mind. This self is false and insincere. I completely lack a pure mind. And later he writes, each of us in outward bearing makes a show of being wise, good, and dedicated, but so great are our greed, anger, perversity, and deceit that we are filled with all forms of malice and cunning. So Shinran is being brutally honest with himself, saying that his greed, anger, and ignorance are so strong that nothing he does is of truth and sincerity. But what is interesting is that when he comes to this limitation of his understanding, in other words, when he comes to the understanding that he cannot be a perfect person, that he cannot become a full person who has no flaws and no blind passions and no attachments, when he realizes he can never attain this perfect state, that is the precise moment in which he becomes the most human. It's not fake humility either, right? Or, people, like in cases where people compliment you, oh, you're so smart, you're good looking, right? And you're like, no, I don't think so. But deep down inside, you think so, right? It's not like that, right? Shinran really felt that he was a person who is incapable of grasping the truth, grasping and becoming perfect. And when he came to that understanding, ironically, right, he was able to tap into true humanity, become truly human, truly human. So as I wrote in the the life in the great life example. Oh, sorry, this is life with a lowercase l, right? And then there's everybody living out their own little lives. But then when we come to this great life, that is, I wrote Muryoju, right? Boundless, infinite life. However, another interchangeable term is, I believe, humanity. And because we understand that what underlies everything, that what the undercurrent of everything is that which embraces everything, we then become truly human. And this is what happens to Shinan. When he realizes that he cannot become human, in a sense, he became truly human. When he realized that there is a limitation of this, in which he cannot be Buddha or understand other people truly, right? That this breaks down and he taps into true humanity. He becomes into true humanity. So in the Pure Land, we become our true selves as one way that's kind of depicted, right? And so I kind of would like to talk about what this humanity means here. Does everybody know the movie Terminator 2? Yeah. So in this movie, the very end of that movie, right? So it's about this whole, cyborgs taking over the world, robots taking over. There's a lot of movies that have these, themes lately, and lately it's been seeming like more and more the case that that's going to become true. But with Terminator 2 was like very epic making at its time, right? When it came out, we all know this, right? And there's this, throughout this whole movie, we see this cold robot that, is forced to kind of, is in the second movie, the cyborg takes on this role of caretaker, right? That has to protect the vulnerable and weak John Connor, right? Who is supposed to be like the future leader of the world, right? And so the cyborg doesn't know anything about humanity and has to work with this kid and protect this child and work with the kid's mom, who is very aggressive and mean and these kinds of things. And at the very, very end of this movie, the cyborg, right, has to kind of destroy itself, right? Because if its chip gets kind of found, and then people can then use that chip to then create another cyborg, and then the story could repeat itself. So the Terminator, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, has to kind of destroy itself and go into this pit of like I forget, like really hot molten like lava type of thing or whatever, and melt itself, right? And so so the whole time this robot is cold, doesn't know how to respond. It's very robotic in movements and all these things, right? But at this one scene at the very end, John Connor is crying, right? He's crying. He's crying because he doesn't want to lose his friend, right? That is going to now that he has to part with, right? And then the robot does something. The robot says, "I know now why you cry." He says, "I know now why you cry." So he says, in that instant, that robot that cannot become human, in all kind of using our reasoning skills, there's no possible way that this robot can become human. In that one instant, becomes human, right? Is able to understand the emotion that this child feels, right? And the connection, the emotional connection that this child felt with the robot. And that's what the robot comes to understand. It's the same thing with Shinan Shoin. He is unable to understand this true humanity, right? How to be a person that truly understands all other beings, a bodhisattva that can understand everybody's feelings, right? And understand that how not to suffer, because that's what everybody is going through, and is unable to get to that point. He reaches this glass ceiling, right? And when his whole world comes crashing down and he encounters this through Honen's teaching, this great life, he becomes truly human. He taps into the world of humanity and becomes truly human, right? And so that's the same thing that's happening. That's the same thing that's happening with us. When we encounter this world of Muryoju, we start to see ourselves and others differently, right? And how we engage with this world differs. We start to think of it differently, right? Right. So that's kind of the example with the Terminator. Right? Very good movie. Yeah. Yeah. Get that on. We got to get that out of here. Right? Arnold Schwarzenegger was really good. He's still doing stuff now. Yeah, I'm very happy that he is doing that. But the Terminator series thereafter is no good actually. After the second movie, right? The third one and everything after that is just terrible. But anyway, let's see. How much more time do we have? Do we have okay on time? Okay. So yeah, that's right. This one I purposely kind of cut it short a little bit. So I'd like to conclude if we could go to the next slide. Okay. So I'm going to now go into the conclusion. So as we close this week, I tried to summarize, some of the main features of the Jodo Shinshu identity in today's society. There's many schools of Buddhism that are here in the United States, including Hawaii, right? There are many books that have been translated that translate the teachings of, for example, great leaders, such as the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, Dogen Zenji, right? And so forth. And although it's important for us to read their teachings, right, and to understand what they mean, it should not come at the cost of us discounting our own tradition. We come from an 800-year tradition counting from just the time of Shinran Shonin. And in this long history, there have been many wars, there have been many discriminative issues in society, there's been many social upheavals or many doctrinal debates and so forth. And just because many of the Shinshu works are not translated into English yet, we shouldn't use that as an excuse to neglect to learn about the rich history that this religion provides us with. Right? We should be proud that we're Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. Right? And my talks this week was an attempt to show that we have much to be grateful for and much to be hopeful for in the coming future as well, right? As Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. Many people ask us, why don't we do sitting meditation? And what I would say to this question is, one, are you not imposing your views of what Buddhism is supposed to look like onto our tradition? And two, how are you defining the word meditation? Right? And then three, when we say Namo Amida Butsu, that is arguably our meditation. That is arguably our mindfulness. We are being mindful of the Buddha, Nen Butsu, mindful of the Buddha. We are meditating on the virtues of the Buddha, Buttoku Sandam. We are meditating on the virtues, praising the virtues of the Buddha. That praising is a form of meditation. Right? So when people ask us, why don't ministers shave their heads and why aren't they vegetarians? My response to that would be, is shaving my head and becoming vegetarian going to enable me to become enlightened? Because Shinran Shonin's critique of the Vinaya, or the monastic code, was to question the intentions behind blindly following these rules. Following those rules didn't enable him to attain enlightenment. And so those are just some of the approaches that I would take in responding to these criticisms, right? My point in bringing this all up at the end of the day, at the end of this week, is to say that if this tradition was telling a lie, if this message of Amida Buddha's Tariki Hongan, right, is not true, then it would have died out a long time ago. Right? The fact that it hasn't, that after 800 years, we're still privileged and able to hear this message, means that Shinran's understanding of the Buddha Dharma has tapped into something deep within our hearts, right? Whether we realize that or not, it moves us in a way that maybe perhaps we don't even can consciously understand, right? And his message connects us to the underlying principle that embraces all of us, again, to this humanity. And that's what comes out in his writing, in his teachings, That's what I was trying to get us to see in all those dry lectures that I gave this week. But all the difficult academic writings that he's writing, yeah, it is difficult and it is dry. But in all of that, we have to see the humanity that he's trying to express to us, right? Because when we tap into that well of this humanity, then we feel that we understand his sentiment in trying to get us to understand that, right? That becomes the motivation to live, to continue as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, right? So in this 21st century, as we see many old challenges facing humankind, such as war, disease, hatred, and then we have new challenges, climate change, shifting power dynamics within this world, right? The rise of artificial intelligence, growing number of people leaving organized religion. In the midst of all this chaos and confusion, Shinran Shonin is challenging us to re-examine our spiritual selves and where we are headed as one human race. He is warning us, are you able to live on without this refuge of Amida Buddha and the Pure Land? Can you really make it on your own, relying on your ego self? How has that turned out for us? Despite all of these technological advances and comforts that we see in our life, how has that worked out for us, relying on the ego self, right? It is now, more than ever, that we need to bring this message of Amida Buddha's boundless wisdom and compassion to the world. And with that, I would like to close this week's kind of lecture series. And I really thank you for coming to every class and sticking it out and listening to me kind of repeat myself over and over again. But I hope that, you know, some of these examples that I use, that I drawn on the charts and the stories that we can, you can feel free to use them. You know, they're basically all the things that I have taken from someone. And so there's no trademark on any of these things. So please feel free to use it, disseminate it. Because, you know, hopefully we can, you know, get Shinran Shonin's message out to the world, because it's a very, you know, I don't mean to sound kind of, you know, kind of trite, but it's a very, you know, significant and profound teaching that Shinran is sharing with us. And I think that we should use this and be proud Jodo Shinshu Buddhists here in the 21st century. Thank you very much for your time. So with that, if there are any questions, yeah.
Yeah, now we'll go into a kind of a question and answer, you know, discussion, you know, phase for the rest of our time.
Yeah, I was thinking that, yeah, I would kind of cut it short and then just try to see if there's
anybody have questions or comments? Go this way. Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Miyagi. Yeah, I really appreciate everything you put in over this whole week and all the preparation too. So I got those ones. One of the things that you mentioned before, we're kind of touching on social concerns and sort of the individual versus the, what was it, the collective unit, Jodo Shinshu unit. So here's kind of a concrete example. So right now at Hawaii Betsuan, there's a rainbow flag that says everyone is welcome here. And I think it's clearly kind of a symbol of Pride Month and reinforcing that what we find in our teachings about absolute equality and everyone's inherent worth, same as anyone else, no exceptions, but of course that has been, less so now, but has been pretty polarizing in our society. So in a sense, we've kind of chosen a side. Yeah. And I know that when my family first moved to Hawaii in 2011, Bishop either was just then or had just spoken before the legislature for same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I was very encouraged by that. So I just wonder, so anyway, it's just kind of a question I'm asking myself. Aren't there cases in which the teachings are so clear, and in this case about absolute equality, that there's not, that we can kind of choose a side?
Right. I see what you're saying. So I think that, you know, to respond to that, you know, the BCA temples, many have kind of taken that position as well. And how should I answer this question? I think that when it's founded on the doctrine, right, then that we should move forward with it, right? I think as long as that discussion has taken place, and then we say, well, based upon this decision, we can move forward, or we can kind of maybe we can take this position, right, to try to get or reflect our kind of doctrinal values, right? Then I think that that's totally okay to do, right? What was I going to say? So what's used for the basis for this of the LGBTQ equality is the 18th vow, right? That all beings are equal. That spiritual liberation is provided for all beings, regardless of where they come from. And I think that that's kind of this action is kind of trying to put that into play, put that into concrete action. And so that's kind of what I think about that, right? Yeah. So I know I did say that as a collective unit, we should be wary of where to stand on certain issues, but I believe that if it's based on the religious doctrine, then we can make decisions to go forward with things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
and there will be. Oh, sorry. That's what I was going to mention. Sorry about that. There will be instances in which we have to do that. Like, for example, Honzan in Japan, what they were for a while. I don't know how it is now, but they're trying to. The previous Zenmon-sama was trying to make a push towards going green, and in terms of staying away from nuclear energy. And this is a direct response to what happened in Fukushima because of the nuclear energy that went there, and his idea was to say that the nuclear waste that we leave behind takes how many was it thousands or millions of years for that waste to kind of dissipate. So we're essentially leaving the earth dirtier than when we first got here, and so that's not really reflective of Buddhist values, is it? And so because of that, he kind of voiced his opinion on that matter a lot more, and so. I think that there are certain times in which we can, right, make a move, right? Yeah, thanks.
There's a question from Pete Doctor in the Zoom room. So go ahead, Pete.
Aloha, can you folks hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, okay. I don't know that I can hear you now, but this is actually kind of a follow-up to what Dave was asking. So I am asking if you could expand on it because the language is so problematic. I got what you were saying about taking sides, and you gave good examples of partisan. Yet at the same time, Shinran gives examples of solidarity with folks that have been outcast, whether it's gender and etc. And so there does seem to be, I'm going to throw out a bunch of questions and then stop and then to listen to your feedback. I'm wrestling with this because, like, just exactly like David said, it doesn't seem to be promoting indifference, right? So you answered some of it with talking about, as long as it's based in doctrine. But I was wondering if you could expand more, about where, like the nuance, is it one thing to, use an example Dave gave about, say, sexual minorities, that it's not necessarily taking a side. It's actually, well, if you thought about being compassionate as taking a side, then you could say you're on the side of compassion, but it's actually against taking these sides because of its inclusiveness You know, it's refused to divide folks as they and us, you know, and so there is that embracing, like the great compassion embraces. But you know, you said something interesting about like you have to decide on whatever the issue is. Like each person has to uh come to their own conscience, if you will. But I get the sense that you're not talking about individualism, right? So that's one of the things I was wondering. Maybe you could expand on what you're saying as not a form of individualism, you know, to each their own per se. Um, you know, especially with a faith that does value Sangha so much, you know, that it's part of its trinity, if you will.
Yeah.
So you know, I'm wondering, you know, like um so example, you're a father, I'm a father, you know, we have children, and I can't imagine you telling your children, well, nobody knows the truth, we're all bombu, so
Right.
you know, to each their own. When your child, you know, say for example, here's folks saying something like, hey, Black Lives Matter, and then someone uh who's pretending or performing to be all exclusives is like, oh no, that's not true, Black lives don't matter, all lives matter,
Uh,
right? And then how would you um approach this with your child, you know, just to put it in a real practical terms? And uh that's probably enough said. Of I really like you to
yeah,
expand and
yeah, like
thank follow.
what did you mean by individualism actually? I don't think I quite understood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So individualism in the sense of, you know, the Western sense of that, you know, each person is like an island, you
Oh,
know,
okay, got it.
not coming from any sense of collectivity,
Right.
but that each person is just privileged and entitled to just be their own, like, you know. And so this it was in response to each person or individual has to decide, you know, their conscience, you know. You did say that. So but some people may interpret that as a form of individualism, or and some people would say individualism is a form of egoism, you know, if you will. uh
Right.
to Right. So
Yeah.
did I clarify better?
Yeah,
Would
yeah,
you say?
thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, when I talk about each person has to make that decision for him or herself, yeah, I'm not talking about the individualism that the promoting this idea of kind of this autonomous ego self, and because you know the push for that is trying to is you know pushing for kind of like self-righteousness kind of thing, and so that's kind of the pitfall of this focusing on individualism as we understand it here, you know, in America and in the West. That's not kind of what I'm alluding to, and I am trying to talk about thinking about, you know, the concern was for talking about each person making that decision for him or herself is in the kind of context of the that I lost my train of thought, that we're all, you know, pursuing the Buddha Dharma together, um, and with that pursuit of the Buddha Dharma together, that each and every one of us has to kind of think for ourselves, as opposed to just blindly following some kind of dogma. And because that's what Shinran Shonin was concerned with. That's what this religious institution is trying to tell us not to do, right? Is to blindly believe in this tradition, that we have to personally engage with this. And so in that sense, you know, I'm putting it in a good light, this individual endeavor, individual decision making. But that's different from this idea of individualism that we kind of talk about here in the West. In terms of the concrete, you know, ness about, you know, what was it, the Black Lives Matter performing to uh, is,
All lives matter.
versus All Lives Matter. Let's see, what would I say to this? You know, I think that, you know, more or less, right? It's the golden rule in Jodo Shinshu in terms of like morals and the golden chain, right? And you know, I think that, you know, to teach a child, right, about Shinran Shoni's talking to us about like the emptiness of our worldly values, right, and that kind of thing. I think is a little too much, right, for that child, and actually I think it's counter productive, right? That the child has to go through this system of basic morality and basic, you know, do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs, right? And it's with that kind of formulation and conditioning that after some point, hopefully the individual, being the child in this case, would see that everything can't be put in black and white, that there are a lot of situations and instances in which things become gray. And in those situations, then, you know, everything that I was taught to believe about right and wrong isn't really how that's, you know, that's not really working out. And so hopefully that sets the individual on the spiritual path to then question the framework in which we look at this world. But I do believe, though, that you know, this general framework needs to be there initially. So I'm not disagreeing with that. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, no, and if I may, a quick follow-up, because it's in the same kind of theme. I get that you were very clear about no siding, right? For example, partisan, but you know, could you say more though where you would take solidarity, like say with a larger community, with a coalition, alliance of other folks who are not necessarily part of a following agenda, but are free agents. So for example, my neighbors, you know, you know, I'm sorry, how like I might not join the side of, you know, a political party per se, but I might have a really strong affinity, solidarity with my neighbors,
right.
you know, or the larger community, for example. And could you say a little bit more to distinguish between those kind of forms of support? Again, taking sides versus a exercise of community.
Right. And yeah, I think that, you know, it's not that, you know, what Shinan's concerned with in the letters, right, is that what happened was that the status quo, the powers that be, persecuted the Nembutsu movement, and they hampered the Nembutsu movement. Whereas, you know, in the name of Buddhism, they hampered the Nembutsu movement, and so you know, for him that didn't compute, and so he was always kind of, you know, wary of, or telling people to be wary of this relationship between political powers and our kind of this Nembutsu movement, right? And so how you feel with your neighbors, right, and then standing in solidarity together with them, that's a completely separate matter, I believe. And how you know, vote in a certain way in politics, and you say that my Buddhist identity informs me in how to vote, that's totally fine. I'm not saying that there should be anything, you know, against that. I'm just saying, as a collective whole, saying that we have to vote in this next election for this person or this political party or this, you know, this thing as Buddhists, you know, that's where I would be a little hesitant, because, you know, it can easily get out of hand, because then it becomes, well, whose agenda are we, you know, is this for, right? And then it's usually the case that, you know, Buddhism gets manipulated and exploited to then fulfill someone's personal agenda or some other agenda that's other than the Nembutsu teaching. And so that's the concern that Shinran Shonin was raising. So the easy answer to this in terms of the history of Japan was the Hongwanji siding with state Shinto and imperialist Japan, right? And so they have since apologized, you know, for doing that. But there's a lot to be said about that, right? Because, I mean, had they not gone with that, they would have definitely been, you know, blacklisted, and they would have definitely been ousted by society. I mean, there were threats to the Honzan about, you know, being burn down if they didn't follow along with this movement. I mean, so what they were doing was a realistic move, right? And so there's a lot to be said about that. But suffice it to say that they sided with the political movement, right? And that political movement made them do a lot of things. For example, they had to build the infrastructure of the Hokkaido region, when at the turn of when it shifted over to the Meiji Emperor, and so they were forced to expend a lot of their funds for the support of the country, and then eventually over time, the Jodo Shinshu tradition had to then kind of submit to the will of the emperor and say that we are paying homage to the emperor, right? When really there's nowhere in the writings of Shinran where it says to do that, and yet things were bent to kind of go that way. And so that's kind of some of the things that can happen, and some of the concerns that I kind of bring forth here too, because I see that there's a lot of interest, right, in terms of Jodo Shinshu and how can we use our values to inform us of social issues, right? That's why I wrote my dissertation. I know the concern is there, right? How do we engage with society and social issues, right? And my position is that if we do engage with social issues, it has to be founded on the doctrine. And if we don't do that, then it means that we're not we're fulfilling some kind of other agenda, right? If we're doing it based on our Jodo Shinshu values, then we should move forward with that. But what are those values, right? And so that's kind of what this whole week has been about. That's kind of what my studies have trying to be about, to collect, and compile what are those values that we stand on. And so the equality thing, that's one of them, right? All beings in the Pure Land are the golden color, right? And so that comes up in the third vow or the 48 vows. So that could be a basis for then saying, right, we should be inclusive of people regardless of their sexual identity, right? And so that's just an example to give, right? Yeah. So
Thank you, Sensei.
yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry, I went on a rant there. Digressed. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
I'd like to, I think earlier you mentioned about how in our encounter with, or the result of our encounter with Amida Buddha, wisdom and compassion, that you're able to kind of recalibrate ourselves, so that something does happen there. And just like to share one experience that I had early on when I took office, and this was when Osama bin Laden was killed. And I was interviewed by a public radio, I think it was, and I gave a very different, I guess, response to, I guess, most of the responses. I mean, I think many of us remember at the time that there was, generally speaking, there was so much in America, there was so much jubilation, I think, over his being killed. And I don't know, I responded a little differently, that, well, thinking of those who suffered, of course, there is, I can't remember the exact word I used. I don't know if relief, kind of a feeling of relief was, I can't remember if that's what I said. But at the same time, I thought that the way our society was reacting was, it made me wonder, was that the most appropriate response? I felt a little uncomfortable that it was overly, I mean, people were, shouting how happy they were, how and so forth. Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, I think I attribute it to encountering the Buddhist teachings that planted a different thought, I guess, in my mind. And so I just wanted to share that how maybe the Dharma, the teachings can, I think, do make a difference and enable perhaps, somehow to bring more peace and harmony in the world, so that we're not as divisive or, see ourselves in one camp or the other.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, when that happened, I'm total agreement with how you felt too. I felt the same way too. There were people dancing in Times Square, right? And every city was like, they were out there, celebrating, right? And I was like, so what, celebrating? I mean, this is in the one hand, on like the kind of the moralistic plane, I guess you could say, or the mundane plane, I'm thinking, this is war, and this is what happens when, when we get attacked, we're gonna attack back. It's just natural that's gonna happen. But the Buddhist side of me, when I was thinking about it, or I was thinking about from a Buddhist terms, is that, is it okay for us to then celebrate the killing of someone? And I that's when I would stop short of going out there and dancing, because that just perpetuates the next time that they're going to attack us again, right? And so that's exactly what happened with Hone Shoni, right? Hone Shoni's dad was killed, assassinated, and then the dad says, rather than to avenge my death, I want you to become a monk, right? And so he ends up becoming a monk, and then and breaks that cycle of seeking vengeance, and so that's basically what happens. And so when we think about our Buddhist values and ideals, I think these kinds of thoughts kind of come up, when we think about how what would be the Buddhist response, as opposed to the natural impulse, right? Yeah, thank you, Sensei. Thank you. Oh, yeah. So that's just a very formative section. I particularly love tonight's talk and the concepts of spirit, which you have gifted us with. I not only thoroughly enjoyed the information in your presentation of it, I feel like I had a helpful therapy session tonight as well. I'm grateful that I found Shin Buddhism, or maybe I found me. Aloha, mahalo. Thank you, Jen. So thank you. Can the speaker compare spiritual maturity and morality? So, thank you for that question. Spiritual morality, and this came up in the last question, is kind of like, in a lot of respects, is like the stepping stone to come to that spiritual maturity. A couple of days ago, I drew out a diagram where it talks about this, these two fields, and on the bottom one, I guess I'll just draw it out very quickly here. Just kind of an abbreviated version. The bottom one being kind of our mundane values of everyday life. So basically, morality falls under here, right? And we're taught that, we need morality. This is more or less the golden rule. And, this is very important, right? To think about other people and how to act within society and things, right? And but after some point, we come to the limitation of mundane values, beauty, justice, health, wealth. These things we find that they're limited. Morality being another one, because, for example, they're always going to be, in terms of morality, for example, when you go to war, right? There's no two sides of any war where one side says to itself, I'm in the wrong here, but I'll go to war, right? No one does that. Everybody goes into war thinking they are right, and that they have, what's the word that's called? Providence, that they're given the God-given right to fight a holy war. Every side thinks this, right? And so then which side is right then becomes the case. No one's right, actually, in the end, because everybody ends up killing each other. And so we see the limitation in all these things. Beauty, justice, we see, right? Because justice, for example, the Supreme Court Justice, what's that guy? Clarence Thomas, right? We later come to find out he's done all kinds of bad things, right? He's been like stealing money and buying like all kinds of things were like done for him on in order to get things in return. And so, even the Supreme Court justices, the highest law of the land, in which we think would be impartial about all things, right, is extremely partial, right? We come to find out. So we start to see the limitations in justice. We start to see the limitation in things like, health, right? Health, your health doesn't last forever, right? And then it's becoming more evident that humans have less and less of this ability to clearly to define when life begins and when life ends, right? How to determine when life begins and when life ends, right? I'm talking about issues such as abortion on this side, or issues on this side would be like euthanasia, right? What happens when brain dead, when someone is brain dead, when do we consider someone to be quote unquote dead, right? Humans cannot determine this line. So it's like everything that we do has its limitation, right? And so we come to this spiritual breakdown, and that spiritual breakdown is what we call this ground zero, this zero factor, right? When everything comes crashing down. And when everything comes crashing down, this becomes fertile ground for us to encounter the world of absolute truth. If we are listening to Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion, right, then this whole new world becomes bright and clear. We re-engage with this world once again, and all of these mundane worldly values is seen in a different light. Is seen on top of this fertile ground, on top of this world of wisdom and compassion. Again, great life, right? That connects all sentient beings. How we then engage with this world, re-engage with this world, changes, I think, as opposed to this, because when we are under this bottom one, we're still thinking in terms of egocentricity. How is this going to benefit me, right? Right. And then I'm not saying that when it comes up here that we somehow lose that ego bubble. We're still in that ego bubble. But what's different is that we see everybody else in this ego bubble, and we also see that as this limited being, right? That I should try to engage with others differently and myself differently, as I mentioned earlier, this soft and gentle in heart and mind. And so that's kind of what I would say is the difference between morality and spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity being on this side, the spiritual maturity here, and then the morality side being here. So Buddhism, or maybe I should specifically say Jodo Shinshu Buddhism does not deny morality, right? It just says that the conversation does not stop here, right? That's the key difference. The conversation doesn't stop at morality. Hopefully that answers that question. Thanks.
Miyaji Sensei.
Yeah.
My question is about, when there's tragic events, a lot of tragic events happen within the last 10 years, I guess, 20 years, 9/11, the shootings at Sandy Hook and all that. The school shootings at Parkland and all over. So much gun violence. The only response I can give is just to say the Nembutsu. But is that okay? I mean, I don't want to take any side or anything, but I think all I can say is the Nembutsu.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your answer. Yeah, and the reason being that you see the futility right, in trying to go out there and trying to stop, and you're trying to factor in all the different things that you see and hear. There's maybe a little bit of just kind of this spiritual, like you're exhausted, right? I'm exhausted in seeing these shootings every day happening, and maybe it comes to this culminating point of just saying the Nembutsu, right? And so I definitely don't discount that feeling. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that feeling. Yeah. But perhaps some other people aren't quite there, right? Some other people might say, no, maybe there is something we can do, based on the Jodo Shinshu values or principles. And other people's response to it might be different, perhaps.
Yeah, just thinking of the personal versus the collective, kind of things that we're talking about. I mean, I think we find that the personal path is more clear, but the collective, what do we do as a temple, or what do we do as a region, and the bishop has been really good with, through our social, concerns with social concern statements, but at the temple level, especially like at Betsuin, we're trying to figure out, what is our collective voice, and it's a kind of a struggle, because of things like you're talking about, especially politics, but I think politics and maybe social concerns, gun violence, reproductive rights, are a little different. They become politicized in America, which is the trouble, because then you try to stay on the humane side of things, then you're accused of being woke, right? And that kind of stuff. But maybe could our role as in the collective sense, be to work together to promote critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dialogue. Talk amongst ourselves to see if we can find where we stand. And then if we kind of come together on something, then we can kind of express it more outwardly. But if we can't, we can't.
Right.
That sort of thing. So that's what we can do collectively is listen and learn from each other. And then perhaps march, if that works out. So that would fill into our Dharma,
So too.
values, right? I mean, the kalamas, right? Critical thinking. It's not just rely on yourself, figure it out. It's go through a critical thinking process, right?
Absolutely.
Those things should be skillful, blameless, praiseworthy, conducive to happiness, and praised by the wise. Those are kind of elements of the Kalama Sutra. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Totally agree with that. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Christianity, the Crusade, discrimination, Islam, jihad, Buddhism, ethnocentrism, Sri Lanka, Rohingya, issues in Myanmar. In Jodo Shinshu, Shinzoku Nitai is also there for Jodo Shinshu identity. We have to be very careful about creating a backing for Jodo Shinshu doctrine and social issues. There is an opinion that when it comes to moral problems, it is better not to get involved with Shinshu Buddhism, but to help on a moral level. What do you think, Sensei? Be careful about creating that backing for Shinshu. Right. There's an opinion about when it comes to moral problems, it is better not to get involved with Shinshu Buddhism, but to help on a moral level. Yeah, so how would I respond to this? I mean, this kind of ties in with what we're kind of talking about here too. That it would be good to think about what are our responses to these certain moral issues or social issues and things, but to have that discussion, right, and to see what our Buddhist values can say about these certain issues, I think is would be the Jodo Shinshu response. I think when it becomes a little problematic when we come down too hard and we say that you're either with us or you're against us. You have to do it like this, or you're against us, right? And that's kind of where I think is the line should be drawn. I think, right? But I don't think that we shouldn't think about these things, right? Because if we don't think about these things, we become irrelevant. And when we become irrelevant or perceived to be irrelevant, then no one will come to Jodo Shinshu I don't mean to trivialize social issues or these kinds of things, but you know how like in the temple, we created things like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, right? We did like basketball. And this was all in an attempt to get people to become members of the church. None of it worked. None of it worked. Everybody just remained basketball members, Boy Scout members, and no one became members of the church. At least that's the way that's in the churches that I've seen, in the temples that I've seen. I don't know about how it is in Hawaii, but more or less, that's the way it became. And so, but as an enzukuri, what they call, to try to create this connection, this karmic connection with the person to the Buddha Dharma, I think that, we could go outside of that, right? And perhaps, thinking about these social issues is one way of doing this enzukuri, right? To think about how to approach some of these social issues. The only thing that I'm saying is that it gets a little trickier with this, because when you do pick a side, then there is a side that feels that they're ousted, right? And that's what Jodo Shinshu is trying not to do, right? Is to try to think of ways to get it so that everybody is approachable. And so having these discussions, these forums, the temple as a venue in which to have these discussions might be good, because it includes, right, both sides of an argument. But when we come down too hard on one side, we risk excluding other people. And that's kind of the concern that I have regarding, the social issues thing. But then again, if we didn't do this, right, would people come to the temple anymore? Or would people even pay attention to Jodo Shinshu Buddhism? I mean, because we're not outside of society, we are within society. So we do have to kind of think about these things, right? The other thing that's been coming to my mind lately is that, a lot of other religious traditions tell their congregation how they should think on every single issue, right? You have to vote this way, think this on this issue, this on this issue, every single thing. They have a thing already figured out for them. And again, that's where I feel like they're just kind of creating this one size fits all, and you're either with us or you're against us, right? But I don't think that that's what Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is, right? You can't create this one size fits all. That's the whole point of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. I feel that we can pick and choose, like in certain social issues that we can get involved with. And then I think that Jodo Shinshu allows for the position of, I don't know, as the answer, right? I don't know is a legitimate answer, I think. But in this country, for some reason, we got it in our heads to say you have to be either yes or no on this issue, every issue. For Jodo Shinshu, I don't think that, because in Jodo Shinshu, the premise regarding social issues or ethics is that everything is gray, right? Nothing is black and white, as a matter of fact. Everything is gray, but from there, we have to make a decision, because we're living in society together. So we have to move in one way or another. But so everything is gray means having the maturity to open up the possibility that I'm wrong, having the maturity to say I can be wrong. And I don't know what the best answer is or the best approach is, but I'm going to go with this one. And that's, I think, kind of the might be the Jodo Shinshu approach to some of these social issues. Okay, great. I do kind of want to say that out of all the 5 days, to maybe take the day 5 with the most grain of salt. This is my opinion, right? I mean, and then I realized that, I tend to be a little bit more like, like let's say this is like the pole, and then there's like a rope, I tend to feel like I'm like close to the pole and I don't really want to like venture off on this long rope into, and so like, other people are going to have probably different responses, or, different ways of approaching issues, right? And other people are like, yeah, we don't need to be so hardline and straight-laced about the religious values, we should just, think about, things in a little bit more free way and kind of move about it in that way. And so, I think people are going to have different reactions to what I said here today. And to say that, that I am well aware of that, and that I'm not saying that, this is the way it has to be. This is what, I've been taught that we're supposed to teach to everybody. But this is just, some of the things that came up as I was doing my research. And so just kind of wanted to share those findings with you. So that's kind of something I do want to mention.
So I wanted to chime in because something that you said toward the beginning of this session really stuck with me, and I jotted it down about the importance of questions. And having the answers is actually not the way to liberation. It's more once we're asking questions that I forget exactly the words, but I just thought that it really applies in this situation. We talked about, Dexter was mentioning forums. Forums are kind of places where people can ask questions and explore.
Yeah.
And we can kind of be open-minded to hearing other points of view. So I need to do some more thinking about this, but even on the example that Pete raised about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter,
Yeah.
you can imagine a kind of a line of sort of Buddhist informed questioning that can be calm, but can help a person along a path to understand what's behind Black Lives Matter and come to a realization through questioning,
Right.
rather than saying this is how it is.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, okay.
I know you talked about the elevator
Pitch? Elevator pitch.
bit. I'm sorry, pitch, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes. And it was so funny because coming here tonight, one of my new neighbors, we entered the elevator together and he said, "Hey, where are you going?" So I told him, and he goes, "Oh, what are you going to hear?" And so he goes, and so I told him a little bit. Now, this is just coming down the elevator, so to my car. And and I said, now he says, "So what is a Jodo Shinshu person? What is Jodo Shinshu Buddhism?" And I said, "Well, I used to say something, but I'm not so sure now, that I'm going to this session." I'm a little bit more confused because a lot of what you say goes right above me, but you want to give a stab at what you think an elevator pitch would be for if somebody else asked me, "Hey, what's Jodo Shinshu Buddhism? What's different about you from other Buddhists?"
Yeah.
Is that unfair?
No, thank you. I think the way that I would answer that is that this is the teaching where the person of the Bombu, right, a person who under normal circumstances would have absolutely no way in which to break free of this shell, right, is able to break free of this shell, right? The person of the Bombu has a path to the Pure Land, right? In other words, this world of oneness, right? Normally, under normal circumstances, you have to work towards extinguishing this circle, right? And through your own efforts, right? But Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is not about that. Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is, as you are able to enter the pure land. In other words, as you are, you're able to awaken into the world of the undefiled, the world of no more suffering, no suffering, as you are, right? And so that is the way kind of I would answer that question. Yeah. And that is this this inconceivability, again, the cyborg not becoming human, becoming most human, right? And through the interaction with human, Shinshu, becoming true humanity and finding his true identity as the self, not as the Bonbu self, but as the self of humanity, Muryoju, right? That's the true self, right? That's the path that is possible for us, for the person who would have otherwise never had that opportunity. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the way I would answer that. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I read or heard that, when people ask us this, it's a good idea to ask them themselves, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Or what is your faith? Because if you have something to compare with, I always think of how when I was growing up, we're told, oh, you believe in an idol. And basically, trying to educate them that no, that the statue and the symbols of the kanji and stuff represent a teaching of gratitude, and that we have respect for others' faiths. Yeah. And maybe that got me down to the bottom floor. I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah. Great, thank you. Well, actually, for the person in the back, what do you find to be the most interesting, or the what speaks to you the most in terms of all of these? For example, everything that came up this week. Is there anything that struck you the most?
What struck me the most was that in such ancient times, there were such technical discussions, and I didn't realize there was so much debate about one calling, multi-calling. I mean, that was such a revelation to me that at that time, that there would be so much discussion and debate. And so that was very interesting to me. Yeah. But can I paraphrase? You said, as you are, you are able to enter the world of the Pure Land, enlightenment,
yeah.
And become enlightened.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Alan Goto, you have a question?
Well, I think the audience, since you have probably answered my question in terms of what Dave Atchison had think, that we've had these social concerns discussions on various issues, and I think it's become very clear in your presentations that it's what questions are important to be able to make some decisions on at an individual level, not in a collective. And I will bring up one that's probably right now the most uncomfortable for me is we've had, within Hawaiian history, there's this overtaking of indigenous people by the United States. And as a great part of this in terms of, I think what Japanese Americans here in Hawaii is, we participated in what is called settler colonialism. And for me personally, I am a beneficiary of settler colonialism in terms of you know, all that has happened in our society, in which I have been blessed with a middle class, you know, upbringing and being able to be educated and all that sort of stuff. But with all the history, which has taken place in other places in the United States or in the world, in terms of what's happened in, say, in Canada with the you know, the Catholic Church and their native you know, native people. It's also happened in Australia. It's nothing new, but when you take all this history, I feel this huge burden on how now is there a necessity to rectify these things? I'm not sure what the Jodo Shinshu view. What would Shinran say with my dilemma?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a tough question, because you know, with Japanese society, you know, the other, you know, Korea and China have you know, have demanded for reparations, and Japan has paid reparations to Korea, but they're still demanding more. And then the question, you know, the question becomes, you know, how much are we supposed to pay, right? And then you know, how many generations down, because you know, the people that did the actions that they committed, you know, their kids aren't guilty of that. So why is it that the kids have to, you know, pay the reparations and continue for that? And then the same argument goes for, you know, with what happened with slavery in North America. You know, after the kids and the kids and the kids, after how many generations, you know, are they going to have to pay reparations? And so there kind of is that argument too. And so anyway, I'm just kind of bringing up the point that, you know, there's no clear line. You know, it's so hard to think about some of these things, right? And what is the appropriate kind of response to it? I don't have the answer, definitely, and I'm just kind of mentioning, you know, how difficult it is to think about this. There was something that did come to mind. You were talking about the Canada. Gosh, I lost my train of thought. But I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, or anybody want to interject and jump in?
I guess what I'm asking in terms of your good counsel is, as Dave Atchison had indicated, is how do we ask the right questions to help us better understand where our whatever spiritual, religious decision making would take place at an individual level. I'm not talking about a collective, you know, Hongwanji wearing purple shirts and going out trying to do something.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, comes to mind is, you know, I think what Shinan might ask as one of the many kind of questions is, you know, or for example, today I went to the Japanese American Cultural Center. There was like this exhibit about, you know, the Japanese who emigrated in like 1850s or something like that. And they came over here, they were like whipped and stuff. And they were kind of basically kind of, kind of like slavery almost. It was like they were forced into, you know, working on the sugar canes and the plantations, and you know, and then when that changed, the wages were, you know, they were getting wages, but the wages were really low, and they're lower compared to some of these other the other ethnic backgrounds. And so you could see this racial superiority amongst you know, white people at the time. And then but then I was thinking, like, you know, there's a lot of sentiment that can be made about, you know, the white people at the time who were kind of abusing the people. And then you look at slavery here in America, but it's like every culture would do that, right? If they were in a position of superiority and they had the resources to do that, it's human nature to feel that you are above other people. I mean, that's natural for you. And then I walked around further into the presentation, and it said that there are these various kenjinkais that are built, right? These Kenjinkais were built because they felt they needed to have, some of the dialects were so different, right? That they wanted to have solidarity within their own groups. And a lot of people were abusing the Okinawans, right? Because they were saying, you're not Japanese, you're not true Japanese, you're too different from us, right? And so they're doing it amongst themselves, right? The racial superiority and creating all these divisions, right? And that it's human nature to do that, it's part of our kind of DNA, I guess, if you will, to have this sense of superiority and wanting to be better than others, right? And Shinshu, I think as one of the things to factor in when we think about issues like this is, do we not all have that sentiment, right? Do we, when I see like Black Lives Matter, right? Or when I see like other issues, I have moments where I'm racist. I have racist thoughts in my head, right? That come up. They come up, right? But I don't think that what makes me a racist is what those thoughts are. I think what makes me a racist is to act on those, right? Is having understood that those feelings are within us is kind of, I think, also the Jodo Shinshu approach too, to be honest with our feelings, right? And then where to go from there. Then say to yourself, okay, these racist thoughts have come up in my mind, but I know that that's not the way everybody is, right? And so with that understanding, then what do I do now, right? To move forward, right? But to then from right off the bat and say, I don't see color, I'm not racist, right? Is suppressing your feelings, right? And we all know when we suppress those feelings, there's certain feelings, they always blow up, right? And they always come out in like these very negative ways that hurts everybody, and including yourself. And I think that it's better to be realistic with those feelings and then to think about where to go from there, because we are, reasonable people, or we are people who need to use this reasoning skills to then think about where to move from there, right? And that's tied in with this idea of Shinnan's notion of understanding the limitation of the self, understanding that my compassion may not be what another person's compassion is, right? The way I define compassion may not be how the person next to me defines compassion. And so who am I to tell this person what compassion is, right? Kuwahara Sensei he's kind of a story he told reminds me of this, is relevant to this, is that one time he ate at a restaurant and he couldn't finish the meal. And then so he, bagged it up and then he left. And as he was leaving, he saw a homeless person sitting, right? And so he's like, oh, hey, I'm going to be a good minister here. Walks up to the person, gives the person obento, right? And then he's like, I did a good thing today, right? In his heart. And then the homeless person takes this, looks at it, looks at what's inside, and then throws it in the trash can, right? So Kuwahara Sensei gets like really mad, right? He's like, wait a minute, like, how could you, right? Kind of, he's like, beggars can't be choosers. And then he realized, oh my gosh, this is what it means to be an egocentric person. Well, I defined compassion in a certain way, and I thought I was being compassionate, but to him, that wasn't being compassionate, and I am imposing my views on this person, right? And so to then kind of realize that we have that capability within us, is to be realistic with our emotions, I think.
Okay, so it's a little past 8, and so we will call our session to a close. Thank you, Reverend Miyagi, for
Thank you very much.
Your wise words, and thank you to again to all the staff and crew and attendees, for the summer session, and your commitment to listening and learning and trying to find those right questions to ask. We'd like to invite everyone to stay for a little pauhana if you would like, but we'd also like to kind of close our session with the Nembutsu, and then as our tradition, please stay for a photo. We will all try to figure out how to line up in front of the altar and take the summer session photo. So maybe the bishop can lead us in the Nembutsu.